He came looking for a job. The clerk laughed and threw his resume in the trash. But what no one expected was who owned the store a year later. The soft hum of fluorescent lights blended with the rustling of shopping bags and the occasional beeping of scanned groceries. It was just past noon on a warm afternoon in the heart of a small, sleepy town. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. The local grocery store, Brookfield Market, stood at the corner of Main and Rose, a squat brick building with dusty display windows and a flickering neon open sign that buzzed faintly. Inside, the air was cool, tinged with the scent of citrus from a nearby fruit display and the faint chemical sharpness of floor polish. Sunlight spilled generously through the large front windows, casting golden patches onto the worn linoleum tiles. Retired couples filled their carts slowly. A young mother wrestled with a restless toddler near the cereal aisle. Familiar chatter floated through the air, friendly, predictable, and safe, and the door chimed softly. Jamal stepped in. He was 17, lanky and quiet, with deep brown eyes that darted around the store. His dark curls were cropped short and neat. He wore a simple white shirt tucked into faded jeans and sneakers that had seen better days. In his hand, slightly crumpled from his nervous grip, was a manila folder with a printed resume inside 3 copies. Just in case, he paused by the entrance for a second too long, causing the automatic doors behind him to slide open and closed. Twice. A few heads turned out of idle curiosity, then went back to their business. Jamal took a breath. He wasn't new to rejection. Growing up on the east side of town meant learning quickly how to be twice as polite, twice as careful, and yet often still unseen or worse, judged before he even opened his mouth. But this was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be his shot. He had rehearsed his lines in the mirror, ironed his shirt 3 times, and walked all the way from his neighborhood just to make sure he didn't miss the manager's office. Hours. He approached the main counter, where a bell was supposed to be rung for service, but the clerk was already there. Rick. A stocky man in his late 40s, with thinning blonde hair, a stained polo shirt, and a scowl that seemed permanent. His name tag dangled slightly sideways, half covered in dried mustard. Rick leaned against the counter, scrolling on his phone lazily. Behind him, shelves overflowed with cigarette cartons and lotto tickets. Jamal cleared his throat gently. "Excuse me, sir. I was wondering if the manager is in. I'm here to apply for the part-time stocker position." Rick didn't look up. Right away. Then, without removing his thumb from the screen, he gave Jamal a long, slow look from his shoes to the folder in his hand, then back to his face. The kind of look that didn't just assess, but dismissed. Rick finally set his phone down and smirked. "You?" he said, incredulous. "You think you're cut out for this job?" Jamal blinked, unsure how to respond. I've worked in my school's cafeteria. I've helped organize food drives at the church. I'm dependable," and Rick cut him off with a chuckle. "Not the kind you share with someone, but the kind you let out to humiliate. You sure this is the right store?" "Kid? We don't usually take folks who show up looking like they're about to rob the place." His voice wasn't loud, but loud enough. A man by the freezer section looked over. A woman near the floral stand paused for a moment, uncomfortable. Jamal's ears burned. The room felt suddenly smaller, hotter. He glanced down at his shirt, wondering if he'd missed a stain, or if something was untucked. But no, it wasn't about the clothes. He knew that tone. He'd heard it before. Always dressed up as a joke, a warning, or a joke pretending to be a warning. Still, he stayed polite. "I have my resume here," he said, extending it. Rick didn't take it. Instead, he leaned forward with an exaggerated sigh, finally plucking the folder from Jamal's hand like it was a used napkin. He opened it, glanced once, then, without even a pause, dropped it in the small trash can behind the counter. Jamal stared, not sure if he had seen it correctly. "Yeah," Rick said, shrugging. "We're not hiring anymore. You can go." Jamal stood there a second longer than he should have, his pride fighting with the sting behind his eyes. No one said a word. The store had gone back to normal. The same quiet conversations, the same sleepy air. He turned without another word and walked out, the automatic doors sighing open for him like an exhale. Outside, the sun was still shining. But for Jamal, it suddenly felt a lot dimmer. The store was quiet, except for the soft whirring of the air conditioner and the dull clatter of shopping carts rolling across the worn tiles. Jamal stepped forward, each footfall a little hesitant, but filled with quiet purpose. He held his resume close to his chest, smoothing the edge with his thumb out of habit, or nerves, maybe both. As he approached the main counter, he offered a tentative smile. "Excuse me, sir," he said, voice steady but gentle. "I was wondering if the store manager might be in. I came to apply for the part-time stocker position." Rick barely glanced up. The man behind the counter was clearly in no hurry. Mid-40s, red-faced, with the kind of tiredness that came not from hard work, but from years of coasting. His uniform shirt clung uncomfortably to his body, sweat staining the collar, and a half-eaten sandwich sat next to the register like it had been forgotten. Mid-bite. Rick finally raised his eyes. Stopped. His gaze raked over Jamal slowly, deliberately. From his scuffed sneakers to his pressed white shirt and the folder in his hand. The moment stretched longer than it should have, thick with unspoken judgment. Then Rick let out a sharp, condescending snort. "Oh," he said, loud enough to carry past the counter. "You're here for that?" Jamal nodded, trying not to show the uncertainty creeping into his expression. Rick leaned on the counter, looking as if he were about to share a joke with the air. "You sure this is the right place, kid? We don't usually hire folks who look like they're about to rob the place." The words hit the air like a slap. A few heads turned. A woman with a toddler froze by the frozen food section. An older man near the produce display looked up from his shopping list. Their eyes flicked between Jamal and the clerk, then dropped quickly, pretending they hadn't heard. Jamal's breath caught in his chest. He felt heat rising up the back of his neck, pooling behind his ears. His hands tightened slightly around the folder. He had heard things like this before. Slippery, subtle comments muttered under someone's breath or masked with fake laughter. But this wasn't subtle. This was out loud, public, ugly. Still, he didn't flinch. He stood straighter and extended the resume anyway. "I've got my application materials right here," he said quietly. "I'm a fast learner. I helped manage inventory at my school." Rick reached out and took the resume with 2 fingers, like it was something distasteful. He opened it briefly, flipped through the pages once, without reading a single line, and gave a little hum then, in one smooth motion. Dropped it directly into the trash can behind the counter. The paper landed softly against an empty soda cup. Jamal's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. For a second, all the sound in the store seemed to blur. The beeping at the register, a child whining in aisle 2, the soft hum of the cooler behind him, it all melted into a numb silence. Rick didn't say anything else. He just turned back to his phone, thumbs tapping lazily, already forgetting Jamal existed. The moment lingered in the air like the smell of something sour. No one said a word. A young cashier nearby had seen the whole thing. Her hand froze on a roll of receipt paper. She looked like she might say something, but then her eyes darted to Rick, then to the customers. And she looked away. Even the people who had heard the insult, who had witnessed the dismissal, the humiliation, They all chose silence. Jamal's chest tightened, not just with shame, but with that deeper, familiar ache. The kind that came from knowing you weren't being seen as a person, just a type, a threat, a joke. He glanced once at the trash can. The folder sat there quietly, its corner now stained with mustard from the wrapper that Rick had tossed there earlier. Still, he said, nothing. No angry words. No demand for fairness. Not even a frown. Instead, Jamal nodded slowly, more to himself than anyone else, and turned to walk away. Each step felt heavier than the last. Outside, the sun was still high and blinding. A breeze stirred the air, brushing against his skin. Like the hand of someone who didn't know what to say, Jamal didn't cry. He wouldn't give the world that satisfaction. But as he walked down the sidewalk, past the cracked concrete and the faded help-wanted signs in other windows, the sting lingered. Not just from Rick's words, but from the silence of everyone else. It wasn't the first time he'd been looked down on. But this time, something felt different. Something in him had shifted, not into anger, but into resolve. He didn't know exactly how yet, or when, but something inside him had quietly promised, "This will not be the end of my story." The pavement beneath Jamal's sneakers felt harder than usual, like it was pushing back with every step. He walked with his head slightly down, not from shame, but to keep the tears from spilling over. His jaw was tight, lips pressed into a straight line. He wasn't angry. He was tired. Tired of people like Rick. Tired of pretending not to hear. Tired of hoping things would be different. The afternoon sun blazed against the back of his neck, and a soft breeze stirred the trees lining the sidewalk. A woman crossed the street with grocery bags in each hand. A passing car played music loud enough to rattle the windows. Life moved on like nothing had happened, but something had shifted inside him. As he turned the corner onto Maple Avenue, the familiar red brick building of the Jefferson Public Library came into view. He slowed his steps. The doors stood open, as they usually did in the warm months, inviting cool air and curious minds. Jamal had passed this place 100 times before, sometimes to borrow books, sometimes to use the Wi-Fi when things got rough at home. But today, it called to him in a different way. He paused at the top of the steps. Then, without knowing exactly why, he walked in. The cool, conditioned air wrapped around him like a quiet welcome. Inside, the library was a world of whispers, soft footsteps on carpeted floors, the occasional click of keyboards, the rustle of turning pages. Jamal headed toward the back, where the public computers sat in neat rows beneath a row of dusty windows. A librarian looked up and gave him a gentle smile, one of the rare kinds that didn't carry judgment. He chose a corner, computer, logged in, stared at the search bar. His fingers hovered above the keyboard for a moment, then began to type. Slowly, at first, then faster. How to start a small business. What is a franchise? Grant programs for minority youth entrepreneurs. No one saw the screen but him, and no one needed to. For the next 2 hours, Jamal barely blinked. He clicked link after link, took photos of information with his phone, and scribbled notes in the margins of an old notebook he found in his backpack. A quiet fire had been lit, and it burned steadily, not with fury, but with focus. Weeks passed. Then, months. And the boy who had walked out of Brookfield Market that summer afternoon began to disappear, replaced slowly by someone sharper, hungrier, and wiser. By day, Jamal worked. He stocked shelves at a small corner store run by a kind Korean couple who didn't ask questions about his past, but always made sure he left with a warm meal. On weekends, he bagged groceries at the farmer's market and carried bags for elderly neighbors. By night, he studied, long after his little sister had fallen asleep and the rest of the house had gone quiet. The glow of his laptop lit his bedroom. Walls, Stacks of library books sat beside him, titles like Business for Beginners, Marketing on a Shoestring, and How to Build Your Own Brand. Sometimes he fell asleep at his desk, cheek resting against rough sketches of a store layout or half-finished ideas. Scribbled in a rush of inspiration, the walls of his room slowly transformed. Posters of basketball players and music artists were replaced with vision boards, photos of clean, modern storefronts, handwritten affirmations, diagrams of supply chains, and sticky notes with motivational quotes. Each note, each sketch, each late-night search was a quiet refusal, a refusal to stay small, a refusal to accept the version of himself that Rick had tried to force onto him. One evening, almost a year later, Jamal sat across from a group of mentors in a downtown community center. The lighting was bright, the atmosphere formal but hopeful. He wore a navy blue button-down and slacks that didn't quite fit right, but he wore them with pride. On the table before him sat a clean, bound copy of his business proposal. The grant panel reviewed his materials silently, their eyes scanning each page. Jamal sat still, hands folded in his lap, his heart pounding, but his eyes steady. "Your concept," one of them finally said, looking up, "shows great potential. And your motivation is clear." Jamal nodded slowly. "I don't just want to open a store," he said. "I want to create space for people like me, people who are overlooked but willing to work for it." He didn't mention Rick. He didn't have to. The scars of that moment lived in his memory, but they no longer held him back. They had become fuel. The panel exchanged glances, then smiles, and for the first time in months, Jamal exhaled fully. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building. The sun hung in the sky, much like it had a year ago, bright and relentless, pouring golden light through the front windows of Brookfield Market. The brick walls looked the same. The creaky door still chimed with that same tired ding. But the atmosphere inside was different. It was tense, heavy. Gone was the gentle murmur of polite small-town shopping. Instead, there were frustrated sighs, muffled complaints, and the clatter of half-unloaded pallets. One woman argued near the dairy fridge about expired yogurt. A man tossed a basket onto the floor when he couldn't find the bread aisle signs. The produce shelves were patchy and bruised, half-empty bins sitting under a flickering overhead light. Behind the counter, Rick looked like a man drowning in slow motion. His shirt clung to him with damp patches of sweat. His name tag was gone. His face was paler, jawline sagging just slightly, as if the weight of months of stress had carved new lines into it. He moved sluggishly, wiping his brow every few minutes with the back of his wrist. The sandwich that used to sit lazily next to him was now replaced with half a cup of lukewarm coffee and a pile of invoices he clearly didn't know how to handle. A handwritten sign taped sloppily to the wall behind him read, "Under new management, coming soon." But no one paid it any attention. Least of all Rick himself. He barely looked up when the door chimed again, not at first. Then he did, and froze. There, standing in the entrance, like a figure out of a memory that had soured in his gut, was a young man in a crisp, tailored navy suit. His white shirt was clean and pressed, collar sharp, and his shoes reflected the sunlight like glass. A slim leather briefcase hung from his left hand, and a silver watch glinted on his wrist. His walk was calm, measured, unapologetic. Jamal. But not the Jamal from a year ago. This was a version of the boy Rick had mocked. Only now he was a man. Taller somehow, or maybe just stronger in presence. His eyes no longer darted, no longer searched for permission. They were steady, calm, knowing. Rick's jaw tightened. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. Jamal's eyes scanned the store with precision. He took in the broken refrigerator light, the nearly empty bread shelf, the customer complaints still bubbling in the background. He paused near the cereal aisle, letting his fingers graze a dusty, misplaced box. Then he turned to Rick. There was silence between them, the kind that wraps a room tight. Rick's lips parted, as if to speak, but no words came out. Jamal stepped forward, slow and poised, like someone who had nothing to prove. He said smoothly, his voice deeper now, confident, "I'm here for the final walkthrough." Rick blinked. "Walkthrough?" He echoed DUMBLY. Jamal reached into the side pocket of his briefcase and pulled out a folder, not crumpled, not hopeful, but official, professional. He opened it with a casual flick of his thumb and laid a document on the counter. The purchase agreement. Rick stared at it like it might catch fire. "This store," Jamal continued, "goes under new ownership by the end of this week. Thought I'd drop by early, see what I'm working with." He didn't smile, not smug, not cruel, just calm. Rick swallowed, his throat bobbing like he had something stuck in it. You're the new manager?" Jamal paused, then gently corrected him. "Owner." The word hit harder than any insult ever had. Rick looked around the messy, broken store, the same store he'd once treated like his kingdom. His name wasn't on any wall. His hands had left no legacy here. And now, standing in front of him, was the same black teenager he'd humiliated in front of half a dozen. Silent witnesses only. Now the teenager was wearing a watch that probably cost more than Rick's paycheck. For a moment, Rick seemed ready to speak, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain, maybe to lash out, but Jamal didn't give him the chance. He gathered the papers calmly, placed them back in his briefcase, and straightened the lapel of his suit. "I'll be sending my team in next Monday," he said. "You can leave your key at the front before then." Rick's mouth opened, shut, then opened again. But Jamal had already turned, walking past the frozen section, past the peeling linoleum tiles, past the battered shelf where Rick had tossed his resume into the trash. The exact trash can was still there. Empty now. As he reached the exit, Jamal stopped briefly to hold the door open for an elderly man carrying 2 bags. The man smiled gratefully. "Thank you, young man," he said. Jamal nodded. Then he stepped out into the light this time, not as a boy looking for a chance, but as a man who had built his own. Rick let out a low scoff, trying to muster whatever confidence he had left. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, sneering. "What are you doing here?" he asked, the disdain in his voice poorly veiled beneath a laugh. "Did you get lost on your way to whatever it is people like you do?" Jamal didn't flinch. He just looked at Rick, calm and steady, the way a wave sizes up a stone before washing it away. "No," Jamal replied evenly. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Rick gave a sarcastic grunt. "Right." Jamal stepped forward, reached into his leather briefcase once again, and this time unfolded a clean, embossed letter on company stationery. He laid it flat on the counter, then tapped a single sentence with his index finger. Rick leaned in. His eyes skimmed the header, brow furrowing. Then the words hit him. "Regional franchise ownership transfer, effective immediately." The silence between them thickened. Rick's face twitched. "What the hell is this?" Jamal looked at him fully now, his expression composed, voice quiet but firm. "This store," he said, "is one of 5 locations I now oversee. As of this morning, I'm the new regional franchise owner. Starting today, this store reports to me." For a full second, Rick couldn't speak. He blinked, once, and again. His mouth opened like he might laugh it off, but nothing came out. There was no air left in the room for denial. The letter was real. The signature at the bottom bore the name of the corporate vice president. The logo matched the one stitched into Rick's uniform. Jamal continued, letting the silence press down naturally. "You remember when I came here a year ago?" he said, resume in hand, fresh shirt, asking politely for a shot. Rick's lips pressed into a hard line, but he didn't respond. I walked out of here with my resume in the trash, and you didn't even bother to look me in the eye. You didn't just reject me. You humiliated me. You let every customer hear it. A nearby cashier had paused mid-scan. A young man stocking the dairy shelf slowly turned, pretending to adjust a milk crate, but clearly listening. Jamal didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He turned away from Rick and walked a slow circle through the front aisle, his fingers trailing across the dusty shelf edges. The empty hooks where cleaning products should have been then, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. It all began to unspool. Flashback, 1 year earlier. Jamal at the public library, hunched over the glowing screen, reading about minority-owned business grants. Late nights filling notebooks with inventory projections and branding concepts. Submitting his business plan to a regional incubator program. Receiving a call weeks later. We were impressed with your proposal. There's an opportunity available to buy into a struggling franchise zone. Would you be willing to take on the challenge? He had said yes without hesitation. Flashback, months ago. Jamal meeting with corporate executives in his sleek downtown office, shaking hands, presenting revised strategy ideas for underperforming locations. One store stood out in the report: Brookfield Market. Rick's name came up repeatedly. Negative reviews, rude staff, disrespectful to customers, unprofessional management. Photos of expired stock, complaints about racial profiling. Anonymous employee feedback describing a hostile work environment. Corporate had been watching. They were just waiting for the right reason to act. Flashback ends. Back in the present. Rick had started pacing. A bead of sweat trickled from his temple. So what does this mean? He snapped. You planning to fire me? Jamal looked at him, not with vengeance. Just clarity? I don't need to, he said. Your file already has 3 write-ups. This quarter, corporate was ready to let you go. I just made the transition easier. He turned and began shaking hands with the employees around the store. The young man at the dairy nodded shyly. Congrats, Mr. Jamal, he said, barely hiding. His grin. The cashier who had stayed silent that day gave him a quick, grateful smile. The janitor, an older black man who had been invisible for years, clapped him on the back with quiet pride. Rick stood by, unmoving, powerless. He watched the same kid he had once reduced to a joke, now commanding the room, confident, respected, and more than anything, earned. For the first time in years, Rick wasn't in charge. Jamal didn't need to say more. He didn't gloat. He didn't throw Rick's words back at him. He simply walked the aisles like someone who belonged, because now he did. At the front door, he turned once more, his voice steady but not unkind. You taught me something that day, he said. Sometimes the people you dismiss are just one opportunity away from changing the whole game. And with that, Jamal stepped outside into the afternoon sun, this time not as someone begging for a chance, but as the man holding the keys. It was late afternoon when the store finally began to settle. The chaos of the transition had calmed. A light breeze drifted in through the open front door, bringing with it the faint scent of summer grass and warm pavement. The fluorescent lights hummed low above the newly dusted aisles, and the distant beep of a scanner marked a gentle rhythm. Jamal stood behind the front counter, the same counter where, just 1 year ago, his voice had trembled as he asked for the manager. The same counter where his resume had been dismissed without a glance, and his dignity crumpled and discarded like yesterday's receipt. But now, the air around him felt different. Not because of the title next to his name or the ownership papers in his briefcase, but because of the peace that came with proving something, not to others, but to himself. Across from him stood a boy, maybe 15, 16 at most. His backpack was slung awkwardly over one shoulder, his shirt slightly wrinkled, and his fingers gripped the edges of a blank job application with anxious energy. His skin was deep brown, like Jamal's had been. His eyes, wide and uncertain, kept darting around the store, as if looking for an escape route. Jamal saw the hesitation immediately. He recognized the signs, the same nervous tapping of a pen, the awkward shifting from foot to foot, the silent, internal voice whispering, "You're not good enough. Don't embarrass yourself." He gave the boy a moment. Then, slowly, he stepped forward and offered the warmest, most disarming smile he could summon. "First job?" he asked gently. The boy nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah," he mumbled. I've never done this before. My mom said I should try, but I don't even know if I'm—" He cut himself off, shrugging. "I don't think I'll get it." Jamal's voice was calm, steady. "Well, it's a good thing you're here. This is where we start." He pulled out a pen from his inside jacket pocket and leaned in, pointing to the top of the form. "Name goes here," he said with a kind grin. "Don't worry about experience. We're more interested in who you are than where you've been." The boy looked up, surprised. "Really? Really?" They sat side by side at the counter. Jamal, on one side of a moment he had once dreaded, now transformed into something redemptive. He helped the boy spell out his address, explained what availability meant, and reassured him that everyone has a first day once. There was no trace of condescension in Jamal's voice, only patience, only care. Behind them, a few employees walked by, greeting Jamal with respectful nods. He returned each one with a word or two of encouragement. The store, though still recovering, had already begun to feel different, lighter, more hopeful. The boy looked at him midway through the application. "Are you the manager or something?" Jamal paused, then smiled modestly. "Something like that." The boy raised his eyebrows, visibly impressed. Jamal just gave a short laugh. "I started right where you are," he said. "Nervous, underdressed, hoping someone would give me a shot." He didn't mention the humiliation. He didn't need to. That part of the story belonged to yesterday. Today was about something else entirely. As the boy handed back the completed form, Jamal took it with both hands, looked it over, then met his eyes. "You did good," he said. The boy smiled. Not wide, but sincere. "You'll hear from us soon," Jamal added. "And hey, whatever happens, don't let anyone make you feel small. You never know where this first step might lead." The boy nodded and turned to leave, his steps lighter than when he arrived. As the door chimed behind him and closed slowly, the camera lingered on Jamal's face, serene, quietly proud. He turned and looked once more at the counter in front of him. The surface was polished, clean, new, but the memory of what it had once represented, rejection, doubt, shame, would always live beneath it, and so would the memory of rising above it. Narrator, voiceover, reflective and warm. Never underestimate someone based on where they are today. The person you look down on ... might just be your boss tomorrow. The screen slowly begins to fade. As the image softens into black, white words appear on screen, bold and still. Respect has no uniform. Character always rises. A soft instrumental plays as the final scene ends. A gentle piano chord lingers. No applause, no fanfare, just quiet reflection, because some victories aren't loud. They're steady, earned, and unforgettable.